Picture this. It's late 18th century France. The air is thick with the smell of fancy perfume and, well, less than fancy peasant sweat. It's a world of towering wigs, extravagant palaces, and a king who has more power than a footy umpire on grand final day. But underneath all that glitz and glamour, something is brewing. A storm is gathering. This isn't just any storm, mind you. It's a revolutionary hurricane that's about to rip through history, tear down a monarchy, and ask a massive bloody question. What is the price of freedom? This is the story of the French Revolution. It's got everything: heroes, villains, epic speeches, and a whole lot of head chopping. We're going to dive headfirst into one of history's most chaotic, confusing, and downright crackers periods. Was it a glorious march towards liberty for all? A moment when the common person finally stood up and said, "Enough is enough"? Or was it a complete and utter frenzy? A terrifying spiral into paranoia and chaos where today's hero becomes tomorrow's head in a basket. The lines get blurry, real blurry. It's a tale where the dream of a perfect society gets a massive reality check, and the ideals of liberty, equality, fraternity get tested by the sharp edge of the guillotine. It's a messy, complicated, and absolutely fascinating story. This isn't your average dusty history lesson. Forget about memorizing boring dates and names you can't pronounce. We're going to treat this like the blockbuster drama it truly is. There are turning points that will make your jaw drop and characters whose decisions change the world forever. We'll follow the action from the grand halls of the Palace of Versailles to the grimy cobblestone streets of Paris. We'll meet the thinkers, the plotters, the revolutionaries, and the royals who found themselves on the wrong side of history. It's a roller coaster of hope, betrayal, and high-stakes gambles where the future of a nation hangs in the balance. So, grab a cuppa, or maybe a croissant if you're feeling a bit Frenchy. We're about to embark on a journey back in time. We'll try to figure out what happens when a whole country decides to press the reset button. Does it lead to a beautiful new beginning, a utopia built on freedom and justice? Or does it unleash a terrifying monster of our own making? The French Revolution is more than just a chapter in a textbook. It's a warning, an inspiration, and a brilliant, bloody mess. Let's get into it, and try to untangle this epic saga of freedom and frenzy. Before the Revolution, France was a kingdom of contrasts. The clergy and nobility lived lives of luxury, paying virtually no taxes. Meanwhile, the Third Estate, 97% of the population, bore the crushing weight of taxes with no say in how the country was run. It was outrageously unfair, and people were getting seriously cheesed off. France was broke, thanks to costly wars and royal extravagance. The price of bread was skyrocketing, and people were starving. This was a ticking time bomb, a powder keg waiting for a spark. The stage was set for a confrontation that would change the world. So, you might be thinking, all right, Hamish, this is all very dramatic, but it happened over 200 years ago. It's all just kings and queens and blokes in tights. What's it got to do with me here in the 21st century? And that's a fair question. But the thing is, the French Revolution isn't just a story about the past. It's the story of the birth of the modern world. The ideas that exploded onto the scene in 1789 are the very same ideas that shape our lives today. Every time you vote, every time you talk about human rights or the separation of church and state, you are speaking the language of the French Revolution. Think about it. Before this massive upheaval, the idea that a normal person, a baker or a farmer, should have a say in how their country is run was bonkers. Power was something you were born with, handed down from God. The revolution blew that idea to smithereens. It championed the radical notion that sovereignty belongs to the people. It introduced the concept of the nation-state, where people are bound together not by loyalty to a king, but by a shared identity, language, and culture. It's the blueprint for nearly every modern democracy on the planet. Its legacy is written into constitutions and declarations of rights all over the globe. But it's also a cautionary tale, isn't it? The revolution shows us the dark side of change. It asks some really tough questions. What happens when the pursuit of a perfect, equal society goes too far? How quickly can a fight for liberty turn into a reign of terror, where people are executed for not being enthusiastic enough about the cause? The story of Robespierre and the Guillotine is a chilling reminder that the road to utopia can be paved with some very bad intentions. It shows us how noble ideals can be twisted into tools of oppression, and how the cry for freedom can be used to justify tyranny. That central conflict, the beautiful dream of liberty versus the bloody reality of chaos, is what makes this story timeless. It's a struggle that countries and societies are still dealing with today. We see its echoes in modern political debates, in protests on the streets, and in the ongoing argument about the balance between individual freedom and collective security. The French Revolution was the first and perhaps most dramatic attempt to solve this puzzle. By understanding its triumphs and its terrifying failures, we can better understand the world we live in right now. It's not just history, it's a living, breathing story about us. France was broke, starving, and seriously ticked off. A proper powder keg. But a powder keg needs a spark. That spark came from ideas, the age of Enlightenment. Philosophers were writing things that shook up the old way of thinking. Thinkers like Voltaire, Rousseau, and Montesquieu were the rock stars of their day. Their ideas spread like wildfire, challenging everything people had been taught. The idea of individual rights and liberty started to take hold. Rousseau said a government can only rule if the people agree to it. Montesquieu argued for a separation of powers so no one could get too powerful. These ideas gave a voice to the frustrations that people were already feeling. It armed the people with the belief that things could be different. The Enlightenment didn't start the fire, but it poured petrol all over it. King Louis XVI had a massive problem. The country was out of cash. He called a meeting of the Estates General, France's version of a parliament. It was made up of representatives from the clergy, the nobility, and everyone else, the massive Third Estate. His plan was simple: get them to approve new taxes. The announcement sent a jolt of excitement through the country. This was a chance for real change. Towns started drafting lists of grievances, massive complaint letters to the king. Traditionally, each estate got one vote, one for the clergy, one for the nobles, and one for the 97% of the population. The clergy and nobility could always team up, leaving the Third Estate completely stuffed. The Third Estate demanded that the voting be done by head, not by estate. The king and the other two estates said no. Instead of solving a financial crisis, he had accidentally created a full-blown political one. The battle lines were drawn. The Third Estate was getting nowhere, being ignored and patronized. They decided to take matters into their own hands. On June 17, 1789, they declared they were the National Assembly. This was a direct challenge to the king's authority. King Louis decided to play hardball. On June 20th, the assembly found their hall locked. It was a clear attempt to shut them down, but this didn't scare them. Led by Honoré Mirabeau, they gathered in a nearby tennis court. They made a solemn promise, the tennis court oath. They swore not to separate until a new constitution for France was written. This was a massive turning point, a moment of pure defiance. The king had tried to block them, but pushed them into an act of unity that would change history forever. The king was in a corner. The National Assembly wasn't backing down, and the mood in Paris was getting uglier by the day. Rumors were flying around that the king was gathering his army to march on the city and crush the assembly by force. People were paranoid, and rightly so. To make things even worse, on July 11th, Louis sacked his popular finance minister, Jacques Necker. Necker was seen as a man of the people, and firing him looked like a declaration of war against the Third Estate. Panic swept through Paris. People poured into the streets, listening to fiery speakers who told them they had to arm themselves to defend the city and the revolution. The hunt for weapons was on. The people of Paris needed guns and ammunition if they were going to stand up to the royal army. On the morning of July 14th, a huge crowd, a mob of thousands of angry citizens, descended on the Hôtel des Invalides, a military hospital, and seized a massive stash of muskets. But they had the guns, they still needed the gunpowder, and everyone knew where the biggest stockpile of gunpowder in Paris was kept, inside a grim, formidable medieval fortress that loomed over the city. A fortress that was also a notorious political prison, a place called the Bastille. The Bastille was more than just a prison, it was a symbol. It represented everything the people hated about the old regime. It was a symbol of the king's absolute power, of his ability to lock people up without a trial, of centuries of oppression. As the crowd surged towards its massive stone walls, they weren't just looking for gunpowder. They were looking to tear down a piece of tyranny. The governor of the Bastille, the Marquis de Launay, refused to surrender. Negotiations broke down, and soon shots were fired. The crowd, now joined by mutinous soldiers from the French Guard, dragged cannons into position, and a full-blown battle began. After hours of intense fighting, the crowd finally overwhelmed the defenders and stormed the fortress. It was a bloody, violent affair. The governor was captured, dragged through the streets and killed, his head stuck on a pike and paraded through the city. The fall of the Bastille was a massive, earth-shattering event. It was a physical victory that proved the king's power was not absolute. The people had taken on a symbol of royal authority and had literally torn it down. It showed that the revolution was no longer just about ideas and oaths in tennis courts. It was now a real physical fight, and the people of Paris had just won the first round. The game had changed forever. After the storming of the Bastille, the summer of 1789 was a tinderbox. While politicians drafted the Declaration of the Rights of Man, the people of Paris were starving. The price of bread was sky high. On a rainy October morning, the fishwives of Paris, legendary for being tough, had reached their limit. They decided to march on Versailles. Thousands of women, armed with kitchen knives and stolen cannons, began the trek to the king's palace. This massive, angry, rain-soaked crowd arrived at the gates of Versailles. King Louis caved. He agreed to approve the Declaration of Rights and moved to Paris. The crowd had won. They had dragged the monarchy into the heart of the revolution. For a year and a half, the royal family lived in the Tuileries Palace. King Louis and Queen Marie Antoinette plotted a secret escape to the border. They planned to flee Paris and head east to meet loyalist army units. Louis hoped to renegotiate with the revolutionaries or get help from other European kings. On June 20th, 1791, the king and queen, disguised as servants, bundled their kids into a carriage and slipped out of the palace. In Sainte-Menehould, a postmaster recognized the king from the new paper money. He rode to Varennes to raise the alarm. The royal family was met by a barricade and the National Guard. The king's identity was confirmed and the family was arrested. The trust between the king and his people was shattered. This escape attempt was the beginning of the end for the monarchy. The king's failed escape changed everything. It was proof for many that he could never be trusted. The calls for getting rid of the monarchy grew louder. In August 1792, another angry mob stormed the Tuileries Palace. The assembly had no choice but to suspend the king and imprison him. A few weeks later, the monarchy was officially abolished, and the French Republic was declared. But what do you do with an ex-king? They decided to put the king on trial for treason. In December 1792, citizen Louis Capet was brought before the National Convention to face his accusers. It was a showstopper of a trial, watched by all of Europe. Letters and documents showed he had been plotting with foreign powers against the revolution. It proved his treachery beyond all doubt. The radical Jacobins argued that the king's death was a political necessity. For the Republic to live, they argued, the king must die. The vote in the National Convention took all night. By a slim majority, Louis Capet was found guilty and sentenced to death. They were actually going to kill their king. Executing him was a profound symbolic act of smashing the old world to pieces. On January 21st, 1793, Louis was taken to the Place de la Révolution. A massive crowd had gathered to witness this unprecedented event. The executioner pulled the rope. The blade fell. A guard grabbed the severed head and held it up for the crowd to see. The crowd erupted with cries of "Vive la République!" The execution of the king was a point of no return. It horrified the other monarchies of Europe. The reign of terror was just around the corner. So they've chopped off the king's head. Revolution won, right? Not even close. Killing the king was like kicking a hornet's nest. All the other kings in Europe freaked out. So they all declared war on France at once. The French Republic found itself surrounded by enemies. Inside France, things were also kicking off big time. Now the Republic was fighting a war against foreign powers and a brutal civil war against its own people. The economy was in the toilet. Food shortages were a massive problem, and the whole revolutionary project looked like it was about to fall apart. They set up the Committee of Public Safety, a war cabinet with almost unlimited power. Its job was to defend the Republic from its enemies. This is where the idea of the terror comes in. The danger came from traitors and counter-revolutionaries. To make sure the revolution survived, these enemies had to be eliminated. They decided to make terror an official policy of the state. The quest for liberty was about to take a very dark, very bloody turn. When you think of the Reign of Terror, one name inevitably pops into your head: Maximilien Robespierre. This bloke is one of the most controversial and complicated figures in the whole story. He wasn't a bloodthirsty monster in the traditional sense. He was a quiet, immaculately dressed lawyer from the provinces. He didn't drink, he wasn't interested in money, and he was known for being completely dedicated to the cause. His mates even called him the Incorruptible because his principles were so rigid. He was a true believer. He genuinely thought the revolution could create a perfect society, a republic of virtue, built on reason, justice, and equality for all. A beautiful dream, really. But here's the rub. Robespierre's dedication was absolute and a bit terrifying. He believed so strongly in his vision of a perfect republic that he was willing to do absolutely anything to achieve it. In his mind, the goal of a virtuous society was so important that it justified any means necessary. He saw enemies everywhere. If you weren't actively and enthusiastically supporting the revolution, then you were probably a secret traitor plotting to destroy it. There was no middle ground in his world. You were either a virtuous citizen or a corrupt enemy who needed to be removed for the good of the nation. It was a black and white worldview that had no room for dissent or disagreement. As the crisis deepened in 1793, Robespierre's influence on the powerful Committee of Public Safety grew and grew. He was a brilliant speaker, and his arguments were sharp and compelling, even if they were chilling. He argued that terror was not just a necessary evil, it was a form of justice. Terror, he famously declared, is nothing other than justice, prompt, severe, inflexible. For him, sending enemies to the guillotine wasn't murder. It was a righteous act, like a surgeon cutting out a cancerous tumor to save the patient. It was a cold, clinical, and utterly ruthless logic that would soon drench Paris in blood. He became the face and the driving force of the terror. While other members of the committee focused on the war effort or the economy, Robespierre became its chief ideologue, its moral compass, if you can call it that. He was the one who defined who was a good revolutionary and who was an enemy that needed to be purged. He was creating a new kind of state, one where your private thoughts and your level of revolutionary enthusiasm could get you killed. The quiet lawyer from Arras, the man they called the Incorruptible, had become the high priest of a new, bloody religion, and the guillotine was his altar. With Robespierre and the Committee of Public Safety, the terror kicked into high gear. They passed the law of suspects, a vague law that allowed them to arrest anyone deemed an enemy of liberty. This created intense paranoia where neighbors informed on neighbors. The revolutionary tribunals became conveyor belts to the guillotine. Trials were a sham with no real defense and often no hard evidence. The guillotine was working overtime. Victims came from all walks of life. Aristocrats, priests, and even the sans-culottes. An estimated 40,000 people were killed during the terror. This was justified as a step towards Robespierre's Republic of Virtue. The idea was to purge the nation to build a purer society. The dream of liberty had become a waking nightmare. By the spring of 1794, the French armies were winning and rebellions were being crushed. But Robespierre doubled down, believing the terror was for perfecting the nation. Robespierre started turning on his own mates, first the radicals, then the moderates like Danton, who were also executed. Robespierre was now at the height of his power, but increasingly isolated. A new law turbocharged the terror, stripping away rights and allowing convictions based purely on moral proof. This unleashed the Great Terror. Members of the National Convention started to get really scared. A conspiracy formed, and on July 27th they moved against him. The convention voted for his arrest. He and his allies were cornered and taken to the guillotine. The terror had finally eaten itself. With Robespierre gone, France finally exhaled the reign of terror was over. The National Convention quickly dismantled the machinery of the terror, freeing prisoners, and ending the purges. Exhausted Parisians craved normality, and the Thermidorians, mostly moderates, seized control. They set up the Directory, a weak, divided government, hoping to prevent another dictator. But France was still in chaos: economic collapse, food shortages, and war on all sides. The stage was set for a new kind of leader, someone who could promise order and stability. Amid the Directory's chaos, the army was France's only success, and in it, Napoleon Bonaparte was rising fast. In 1795, he crushed a royalist uprising in Paris with ruthless efficiency, earning instant fame. The Directory, both grateful and wary, sent him to command in Italy, hoping to keep him out of politics. Instead, Napoleon's victories made him a national hero and a master of propaganda. While politicians squabbled, Napoleon built loyalty among his troops and amassed real power. He was no longer just a servant of the state, he was becoming its master. France was ready for a strongman, and Napoleon was ready to answer the call. Napoleon's ambition soared after his Italian triumphs, and even a failed Egyptian campaign couldn't tarnish his legend. Returning to a crumbling Directory, he seized the moment, staging a coup in 1799 and establishing the consulate. As first consul, Napoleon brought peace, reformed government, and restored order, exactly what exhausted France craved. His popularity soared. In 1802, he became first consul for life. By 1804, he crowned himself emperor, ending the republic in all but name. The revolution soldier had become a monarch, founding a new dynasty. France traded chaos for stability, at the price of liberty. Napoleon's empire wasn't a return to the old regime. He locked in many revolutionary reforms. His Napoleonic Code unified French law, enshrining equality before the law, meritocracy, and property rights. He centralized administration, reformed education, and rewarded talent over birth. These changes shaped modern France and spread across Europe as his armies advanced. Napoleon was both conqueror and modernizer, unintentionally sowing the seeds of future revolutions. The frenzy ended, but the ideas of liberty and equality endured. The revolution's legacy was now woven into the fabric of Europe. So was the French Revolution a triumph of freedom or a descent into chaos? It was both, a leap toward liberty and a warning about the dangers of extremism. The revolution gave us democracy, rights, and the idea that power belongs to the people. But it also showed how ideals can spiral into violence and tyranny. Hope and horror, progress and bloodshed, these were inseparable. The revolution remade France and inspired the world, but at a terrible cost. Freedom or frenzy? The answer is both, forever intertwined. Why, after more than 2 centuries, are we still so fascinated by this story? It's because the ghost of the French Revolution never really left us. Its central conflict, the epic tug-of-war between liberty and order, between the rights of the individual and the power of the state, is still the main event in politics today. We are still wrestling with the very same questions that those blokes in the big wigs were trying to figure out back in Paris. Every time there's a major protest on the streets, anywhere in the world, you can see the echoes of the Bastille. The revolution set the terms of the debate for the modern age. It's the operating system that much of the modern world still runs on. It was so dramatic, so total, that it became the benchmark against which all other revolutions are measured. The legacy is also a warning. Robespierre's story is a timeless lesson in how absolute belief can corrupt absolutely. It's a constant reminder to cherish debate, to tolerate dissent, and to never, ever take our freedoms for granted. Ultimately, the French Revolution is more than just a historical event. It's a grand, sprawling human drama about our own best and worst impulses.